The next thing we wanted to cover was recorder deployment, requirements to push for Windows and for Mac. So for the Windows, it's pretty self-explanatory when we get ready to install it. It's also in the help manual, but the Mac requires a little bit more configuration before you're able to install it. So you want to go to the manual, type in Mac. It'll tell you how to deploy, preparing the Mac. There are some certain things that you have to do, like turn on SSH, remote computers, have a local admin account, and then you have to create a manual setup file, which I'll show you that when we get ready to deploy to a Windows. And once you create that for the Mac, then there's a command that you run down here on the Mac itself to execute the manual setup file. Now install the Mac client and reboot it. Okay, so let's go ahead now and move into recorders. So ungrouped. Now you have a couple different options here. You can do an Active Directory import. You can import one file or add one machine. For this scenario, I'm going to actually do an Active Directory import. So I got to add my domain name here, the account that has domain admin privileges, and then click Submit. Checks for credentials. It's going to go through and look at the OU trees. There they are. And I know where my computer is that I want to deploy to. It's under computers, and it is going to be this workstation here. Then you add device. And then if I want to push to this machine, I can click next. I can schedule it to push now during a schedule. So after hours when the users are not there, you'd put in the credentials. You have some more options down here if you want to use a different recorded policy. Remember, I mentioned the different policies you could create. So I'm going to leave it as defaults and use the ones that are canned with the product. Alright, so I want to schedule now. And I'm going to put my password. Then next. Then you want to select what license type. So I'm going to use a Veriato 360 license. And then next. Then you get a summary and click install. So my client is running over here. Okay, so we see it's about to install here. So what this status will do is tell you in near real time what's happening with the client. So if you got invalid credentials or the recorded version's invalid, there's a lot of different feedback it will give you on the status of the agent. Okay, so now I'm going to jump over here to the client and let's see if we can see the Bootstrap service being deployed down to the client. What the Bootstrap does is it actually pulls down the recorder, installs it, removes itself, and then reboots the box. Okay, so there's the Bootstrap service. The machine is now rebooting. So after the reboot, we'll see this change as recording, and then we'll be able to hit the little down arrow right here and see who's logged in. Now that the install is complete, next I'm going to go back up to my client and log in. Okay, then I'm going to go back to this server and we should see the status change. Okay, then we just click on the little down arrow here and we should see that we're logged in now as the admin and ain't time for that. Now one more thing I want to show you is if you want to build a custom message to represent a dialogue of your choosing, such as an antivirus or patch update prior to doing the installation, you can do that up here in the hamburger and then select here is the message. You can create your own, you can do no message or a default message, and this is what it would look like here. Okay. Next, I'm going to show you how to create a manual setup file. This would be used in workgroup environments, or if you're dealing with network related issues, or you physically want to go to the target machine and install the recorder. It could also be used with third-party deployment tools like SCCM, Tanium, PSExec, and a few other ones out there. So to create that, you select deployment and then create manual setup file. Then you select what operating system you want to build it for. You also are reminded to exclude the files. And let's say we're going to go with a Windows. Then you can adjust what policy that you want to assign to it. So I'm going to use the initial. And then you can select what license type you want to assign with it. So let's say it was a 360 detail. And then if you want to assign it to a group, you can do that from here. So when it adds the machine automatically to the list below, it will already be there for you. And then you just create the file. And where do you want to save it? I'll save it to the desktop. And here it is. It's a batch file. And you could edit it. We do have some customers that have edited it and use it for like a group policy. So you can edit this. Alright, that's the manual setup file. Next, we're going to go back to the agenda. And we're going to go over other deployment scenarios: virtual desktops, Windows and Citrix, terminal servers, and then remote computers. So let's look at the virtual desktops first. Deploying to a virtual machine is pretty much the same scenario as if you're going to deploy to a physical machine. The only drawback with some virtual machines, especially if you're dealing with Citrix or VMware non-persistent VDIs, is when the user logs out of that VDI, it gets destroyed, which could also destroy the data that has been cached on the machine and has not had time to push up to the server. So in that scenario, you'll want to adjust the recorder policy with a network share location as seen here to store those data files. So that way when the user logs out, the VM gets destroyed, the data is still good. And once they log back in, any of that stored data then is pushed up to the Veriato server. Alright, so that's really the biggest thing here is non-persistent VDIs. Alright, for terminal servers, pretty much the same thing with a physical machine. You install it on a terminal server or Citrix server. The only thing you may have to adjust for terminal servers or kiosk machines is alternative shell support. And I showed you that briefly in the recorder policy under client options. So those are the settings right there. And then what you would change them to is down here. And here they are. So for Citrix, it's WF shell.exe. For terminal server, it's RDP shell. Alright, remote computers. This would come into play if you're dealing with machines that are continuously off the network, or the user has no VPN connection and you want to push the information over the internet. Now remember, it's going over default port 443 unless you changed it during the installation. But you have to have a public facing IP address and you have to do some port forwarding over to the FQDN of the server. So that's got to be resolvable from the outside. What this tool will allow you to do, that I'm showing you here, is to change the address of the server. And I'll show you that, and the port, and even the certificate, the SSL certificates, and then you can adjust the ports and the username and password here. Because once you install it, there is no way of changing it without this tool. And the tool is part of the install folder that you can install. So let me show you where the server information is located. So that's down here in the server settings. So this is what it's going to try to resolve to, and this is an internal address, so of course the clients won't be able to see it. So you have to have a public facing address, whatever port you decide to use, then you can use that tool. It's right here. So this is part of the setup folder, and you just run it as administrator. And you put your new address in here that's public facing. If you want to leave the default port, good to go. If you don't want to use your own certs, leave that box unchecked and it will auto use our certs for you. That's the easiest method. And then pretty much it should detect all the other stuff and you should not have to change any of this. And then you put your username and password in that you created during the installation, and that will allow you to change it. Once you do that, all the services should restart, and then you're good to go. All right, lastly, third-party deployment options. So I'm going to go back to the help manual, and I'm going to go up to deploying to recorders and deploying with SCCM. Now SCCM is going to require you to create a manual setup file. We already went through that, but if you forget, the instructions are right here. Click on that hyperlink and it'll show you how to do it. And then you go through following these instructions. So you add the client to the SCCM for deployment, and as you can see, we have very detailed instructions on how to do this. Again, it's part of the help manual. So it's pretty lengthy steps, as you can see here. So that kind of gives you an idea of what kind of steps you're going to go through. But you can use other tools that can deploy our batch file, like Tanium or some other ones out there. And you can even use a group policy as long as you script that batch file to work with it.